So I'm going to demonstrate how to create a pivot table and pivot chart using some COVID-19 data that I managed to get online. And this is how the data set looks like. Let me just go ahead and widen these columns. And now this is a data set that's considered to be a wide data structure, meaning that we have a whole bunch of columns that where these some of these columns are related, are kind of similar in terms of a variable. So you'll notice the first column in this data set is things related to province slash state, where we have some missing information on a lot of these records. So each row would represent a record, a related record in this data set. Now, if we just pay attention to the first record, which is Afghanistan, we are recording information in terms of their latitude and longitude, and we also have data on each date from starting on January 22nd all the way to June 16th, related to total confirmed COVID-19 cases. And this is international data, so we have this information on a whole bunch of countries. Now, there are some parts of this data set that I'm not really going to be interacting with in this demonstration. So I'm going to go ahead and use a subset and delete some of the columns. Now, because this is a wide data set, I'm going to convert it from a wide data structure to a long data structure. And before I do that, I just kind of want to subset the information and make some changes. So I'm going to go ahead and get the filter option here. So I'll click on the data tab and select filter. And I just want to focus on those countries that have a missing value for province state. And uh, the reason I'm doing this is because some of the countries that have these province state might throw off some of the analysis that I'm going to do. And I'm just, for demo purposes, just going to focus on all the countries that don't have a province state value. And the way that I'll do that is in the filter option for that variable, I will select the blanks category. So it's only going to show me those countries that have blank values here. So I'm subsetting it to that. And I'm also going to delete the latitude and longitude columns, since I won't need this for the analysis that I'm going to do. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this information now. So everything from the country region down to the last date that's being recorded, I'm going to go ahead and do a Control C, copy that over. I'm going to open up a new worksheet and I'll paste that there. And because it's a lot of data, I'm going to get a warning letting me know that it might take a little longer than usual to populate this data. So I'll press OK. And you can see here that it's processing here. So depending on your computer, your processing speed and memory, it may be a little faster or slower than what you see here in this video. So it's done. I have, um, let's go ahead and see how many records we have here by just going all the way down. So we have about 185 records, because remember the first row contains the data field labels. So let me go ahead and go back up. Yeah. And now what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and go to the data tab, and under the get and transform data, I'm going to select from table slash range. Now, again, what I'm going to do now is convert it from wide data to long data. So essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to have three columns. One column represents the country and region. Another column will represent the different dates that's being recorded for that country slash region, as well as the values of total confirmed cases. So I'll click on this button from table slash range, and notice it's highlighting a portion of my data here. So not exactly sure why it's selecting this. So let me go ahead and select it before I press on that. So I'll select the data myself. There you go. So this is the selection that I want. I'll press OK. And then I get a screen and it's titled Power Query Editor. And what I'll do here is I'm going to select the columns where the dates are. So I will select that first column, and then I'm going to hit on I'm going to press the Shift button on my keyboard, and then go all the way down to the last column and select that date. Then I'm going to select the Transform tab, and under the Any Column section, I'm going to select the Unpivot columns. And this is how my new structure looks like, where I have three columns. One column is the country slash region. The other column, right now it's titled attribute by default, and I'll change that label, but this represents the different dates. And then the total number of COVID-19 cases for that date. Notice the first several observations that we're dealing with here has to do with Afghanistan, but as I scroll down, there are other countries that are in this data set. So I'm going to go ahead and conclude this editor by going to Home tab, and then under Close, I'm going to select the Close and Load. And now I have a table that has my long data. And so this is appropriate when it comes down to data analysis, whereas the Y data might be appropriate for recording data, but it's really not the best type of structure when you want to do analysis on it. So this is why I'm converting it. Now, what I'll also do, notice I created a new worksheet, and I'm just going to bring it over to the right-hand side. And this is the worksheet that I restructured and I reshaped into this. Now I'm going to go ahead and create another worksheet where I'm going to copy this information over. I don't want it in a table format, so I'm just going to go ahead and say paste values. And this is going to be the table I'll refer to when I'm creating my pivot table. All right, so for the attribute label, I'll go ahead and change that. And then for value, I'll call this total cases. And these are COVID-19 cases. Let me go ahead and go to data, and I'm going to select the filter option just so we can kind of get an idea of the United States information. So I'm going to select just the US and subset that information. So by looking at this subset data, we notice that January 22nd was the first confirmed case of COVID-19, and it starts to increase since then. I'll go to the last recorded date for the US, and on June 16th, we had 2,137,731 cases. So these are total confirmed cases as of June 16th. Now, I'm going to go ahead and I will create a pivot table off of this data set that I have here. So I'll just go ahead and leave it as filtered right now. I can always change that. I'm going to go to the Insert tab and go to Pivot Table. And it's selecting all of the data inside that spreadsheet. And I'll go ahead and open that up in a new worksheet. I'm just going to press OK. So I have my template here, and I can start dragging variables down to do some analysis off of it. So I'll go ahead and grab country region and place that to rows. And we have the list of countries that I can do an analysis on. And for total cases, I'll go ahead and put that under the values portion. And we have now this is the sum of total cases, which is a little bit misleading, and you have to be careful here because this is an inaccurate. These are all inaccurate numbers of the total cases for that country, because in the data set that we're dealing with here, um, so for example, let me just go ahead and just demonstrate. So if we're going to focus on the US, let me just go ahead and filter that here on the pivot table and just select US. So here it is, press OK. And this is the value that we get. Now, going back to the data set, and I'll go ahead and just subset that back to, oops, that's not the correct one. I think it's sheet. Let's see. Yeah, this was the one. So going all the way down, the last recorded date had this amount. So this is what the total number of cases. So when I dragged the total cases down to values, it summed up all of these numbers here, which is inaccurate because each of these values don't represent new cases for the day. It's the total number of cases. So you've got to be careful when it comes down to the numbers that are generated using the pivot table. So what I do want to do is I'm going to go ahead and create another data field in my long data structure here. So I'm going to take off the filter and create a new column. I'm going to call this new cases. And I'll go ahead and unfilter everything. And to get the new cases for a given date, the formula I'm going to use is a present date minus minus the previous date in terms of their total cases, and that will give me what the new case, the new cases for the day. Now that will be equal sign this date minus the previous date values, and that will give me just the new cases for the day. Since there is no previous day for the first recorded observation, I'll just go ahead and put 0. And I'm going to use the filter option and let the rest of my records get populated here. I want to do just kind of look through this data. I notice that there are some negative values here. So for example, when I did my calculation, uh, right here we have a negative value because it went and looked at the previous record, and this is incorrect because it's comparing it to another country's number. So what I want to happen here is if that previous date of total cases is coming from a different country, then uh, give it the number 0. Um, so that's going to require an if statement. So let me go ahead and go back up here, and I'm going to select an if function here. And this is going to be an if function where I'm going to have to start it off in a second observation. And I will say this in terms of my condition, this logical test, I'm going to first check to see if the present record and the record before that is the same country. So if A3 equals A2, then what I want it to do is subtract its total cases from the previous total cases. And for the if statement right now, what I'll just go ahead and do, it, I'll just go ahead and say flag. And then I'll close off with hit enter. And then I'm going to go ahead and let the rest of these records populate here. So notice what ends up happening is it calculates it, but then I get a flag because it noticed here that there shouldn't be a comparison when you're trying to calculate the active cases because we're not looking at that same country. So I will have to change this flag to the number 0, and that will take care of that issue here. So I won't get any sort of negative number or any sort of incorrect number here when I'm doing my analysis. So I'll go back here and then I'll just change the code and say 0. So if it's not equal to each other, if these two countries are not equal to each other, then just give it the value 0 instead. So I can go ahead and do that for everything here, and that takes care of that problem, right? So this is the old column that I'm going to delete. I don't need that. So this will really represent the new cases. I'll put a 0 for that first record here. I'm going to delete this column, and now I'll just go ahead and create a pivot table off of this new table that I have here. So I will go ahead. Let me just see something really quick if I do this. Yeah, so I'm just going to go ahead. I'll delete this and now create a new pivot table off of this new data set. And I have that new variable that I created here. So I'm going to select the country, put it into rows. And for instead of total cases, I want to show the new cases. And now, even though I called it new cases, I can change the label. But now what we'll just kind of cross-reference the numbers here. So I'm going to go back to the United States, just filter it in my pivot table, and look at that number. Yeah, and that's the correct number. So when you sum all the new cases, this is what we get here. So now that I have this pivot table the way I want to, uh, I can go ahead and do some additional analysis on this. Now, let's say, for example, I want to create a pivot chart, and I will click on this pivot table, go to Analyze, select Pivot Chart under Tools, and I have my first recommendation is a clustered column, and I'll just go ahead and press OK. And this is what it looks like. It's a little bit hard to read through just because there's a whole bunch of data that is involved here. Now, I'll just go ahead and close off of this and this. As I resize this visual, I'll get more information shown here. Now, because we're dealing with so much, it's kind of hard to assess the COVID-19 cases, the total COVID-19 cases per country. So it might be a good idea to subset by filtering, right? So we could easily just filter it based off of the option that we have here. So if I want to focus on just a selected number of countries, I can do that. So let me just uncheck that, and let me select Mexico. Let me select the US. Let me do, let's see, I'll select Italy, and I'll do Brazil here. Sorry, so just a handful of countries here. And so now I have this visual where I'm able to compare how these countries are doing based off of the total cases. And as I change my filter, um, this will automatically change as well. So here is just one visual that you can show. I can create another pivot chart. So let me do that. And let's say, for example, I'm going to go ahead and select I'll do a pie chart and press OK. And this is a defaulted pie chart that uh, comes out. I'll just go ahead and place it right here for now. And I can change this chart style by going to design, and I'll select the one where I get the relative proportions. So this is just comparing these four countries and their proportions. Now we can see here 62% uh, of the COVID-19 cases based off of this subset is coming from the US. And then the rest of these, you can see these numbers here. I could resize this and move some of these numbers around if they're overlapping and so on. Again, if I were to subset and look at a different set of countries, so let's say Afghan, and I'll do, let's see, Japan, and I'll also do New Zealand. Press OK, and you can kind of get an idea of how these three countries are doing in relation to each other. And notice how the bar chart also changed. So when you're creating these dashboards, for example, you can have tabular data where you have different pivot tables showing different types of information, and you also have different visuals, and they're all tied to each other. Now, the thing is, if you want to show maybe a subset of countries and use the same type of chart, so for example, 10 countries on a bar chart and then 10 different countries on a different bar chart, you would have to use a different uh, pivot table. Let me go ahead and demonstrate what I mean by that. Um, I will select let's see here, I'll go to Analyze Pivot, and let's say I want to do another bar chart, for example. And I want to try to subset this and just focus on a different set of countries. Now, let's say I'll just choose the first four that I have here. Press OK. Even though I have two bar charts, they're both changing because they're referencing that same table. And that's what I mean by you'd have to create a different table, and it will and tie in that chart to that pivot table. So one way you can do that is through go ahead and select a pivot table again, and I'm going to say I want to show on an existing worksheet. Now, what is that worksheet? It's going to be this worksheet, sheet 5. So let me go back. I'm creating it. This is the data that I want to select, existing worksheet. And I will select the worksheet 5, and I want to place it right here. And I'll press OK. So now I have two visuals that's tied into that first pivot table, and then I have another visual where I haven't really populated this table just yet. So let's say, for example, I am going to put in the same items here, like so. Right. So now, if I click on this pivot table and then go to Design or Analyze Pivot Chart and select the column, the cluster column bar chart, press OK. Now I have a bar chart that's tied into that table. So I can filter it, and let's say, for example, I'll do the next 4 or so and just focus on that subset. Now, notice that some of these countries don't have data inside of it, and that's why we have no bars presented here. But hopefully you understand that these charts are tied into specific pivot tables. So that is how you would create different visuals off of the same table through different pivot tables, or through the same data set off of different pivot tables. The next part I want to do is demonstrate how to uh, create a time series based off of this data that I have here. So dates, I'm going to bring in dates. I'm going to put that information into I'll go ahead and put this into the rows. Right now it's called access categories, but I'm going to just go ahead and bring that down there. And now you'll notice that this second pivot table that I have has the time period data, right? So now if I wanted to move this table around, I can go ahead and notice I just selected all of it. I can do a control X, which is a cut, and do a paste and position it where I want. Or you can highlight it, and then when it's highlighted, bring your mouse over to the border where you have a solid black 4 arrow icon like this, left click, and then you can drag it to wherever you want. So I'll go ahead and just drag it down right here since we're focusing on this visual. And I can I'll go ahead and I'm going to select a different set of countries, and I'll do US, um, United Kingdom, um, I'll do Spain, and New Zealand again. Press OK. So notice when I selected those, I have this bar chart where it's showing me information in terms of the time period, and I'm able to compare them by countries. Now, this is a lot of information here. This is probably something that you'd want to kind of modify, but you can kind of see an overview of how New Zealand is doing in terms of code cases versus how the US is doing, right? So US is not doing so well in terms of COVID-19 related cases. New Zealand is doing pretty well. So that's one way. Let me go ahead and create another visual here, and I'm gonna select first. I'm gonna choose which pivot table by placing my active cell on it. Go to design. I'm sorry, analyze pivot chart, and then since I do have time related data, I'm gonna go ahead and select a line chart and press OK. So now I have this line chart where it's also comparing the different types of countries in terms of their performances here. So a lot of times when you're dealing with time series data, line charts are the best way to analyze this, but you could analyze it through bar charts in this method as well. It's not quite clear, so you might have to resize some of this information and also maybe exclude some of the countries just so you can get a better assessment and color code some of these things too. And they're all that's all related to the formattings and options in the chart styles that you have. Okay, so I'm kind of gonna pivot some of this information because I want the x-axis to be shared. So to do that, I will go ahead and place the let's see here. I'll play around with it. Yeah, so country is going to be put here on the top right quadrant, and you'll notice that now as I shifted this over here, I also have my visual now sharing the time periods here. Now the different lines are color coded, so you're able to tell exactly which country we're taking a look at based off of the legend here. So let me just go ahead and check mark everything so we can see how that would look like. And this is based off of all of the countries that we have in this data set, right? So a little bit messy. So this means that we would want to kind of filter this and create different pivot charts and pivot tables that are tied into it so we can show the different countries however it is that we want to show that. So I'll go ahead and just check everything, and I'll select the US and press OK. So we can just examine the US. And this is what we have here. So because it's selecting everything from January 22nd until late mid-June now, you only see the tick here that says June 8th, but we could expand this, and this will also show a little bit more information here. Now, sometimes you don't want to have all of this shown, so you can filter that information um, And now I'll bring in dates and put it into filters. Or better yet, let me take that off and let me do undo. And I'll just go ahead and filter the dates based off of the pivot chart here. And I have different filter options I can choose from, and I can give it certain time periods that if I was interested in a certain time period interval, I'll go all the way down and just select a few of these here, just so we can see how this looks like, and I'll press OK. Right, so now we can kind of get an idea of the trend over the last several days. But sometimes we might not want the legend to appear like this. And the reason why it's appearing is just because we're dealing with one country. And if I were to add additional countries in here, then we'll see this disappear and it will focus on the countries that I'm examining. So if I were to put countries in filters, and here I'll select a couple of countries. Let's see here. I'll just choose do Brazil, Greece, Germany. Press OK. Well, we only see one line, right? And I want to know why. So it could be actually here. Okay. So I should have put the country back into the column section here. And you'll notice that it the legend is changed. So again, this is just a matter of kind of playing around with this information and seeing how you're going to want to present it. So I've created several visuals off of two different pivot tables. So I'm creating a dashboard essentially, and anytime that there's going to be more data, I can put it into my data set, and it will automatically populate into my dashboard, and those changes will be reflected. Right? And normally, when you have a bunch of these visuals, you want to kind of adjust them in a way where they look, where the presentation is organized neatly. You don't want them to be scattered around, and just move your tables and charts and organize them in a manner where it's aesthetically pleasing and easy to assess this information. So here I have my pivot table. I can cut and I can place it maybe right underneath this visual here. So I have different ways of presenting my information here, right? So I hope this gives you some perspective on how to use uh, pivot tables and pivot charts and creating a dashboard using this data set. Thank you for watching.